The idea was that Mātauranga Māori knowledge should be considered equivalent to science. And there was a push at that stage to introduce Mātauranga Māori into science class at both secondary school and universities.
Is it subject to the same process of falsification, hypothesis testing, etc.? Or do we just accept it as...
Well, I think it's very different to science, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's an issue.
Isn't it racist to consider knowledge tied to certain groups? We don't say that about white people knowledge.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction.
Kendall, there's a lot going on with free speech in New Zealand, where we are now. What's going on? What just happened?
Well, the government has announced that they're going to introduce legislation to secure, I don't really want to say enforce, but ensure is probably the best way of putting it, free speech in New Zealand universities.
Why would they need to do that? Because
of, there are clear problems with free speech in New Zealand universities, I think, as has been shown in various surveys, including the staff survey at my own university. So that's internal data. There are various people who will question other sorts of surveys, where people are randomly approached to, academics are approached to sort of suggest what they might think about free speech at universities. But the staff survey is pretty secure because the university runs it itself. There's no outside influence on that. And that said that about 49% of academics were afraid of making various statements or concerned about the impact that they might have.
Making statements about what? What are they afraid of making statements about?
Some things in particular. Treaty of Waitangi is one of them, and other things to do with gender, I guess.
Things related to Indigenous peoples. Gender, is that in there too?
I guess gender is in there too. I haven't been so involved with that personally, but there's just sort of an atmosphere where a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people feel that they're going to be getting blowback if they say something, and a lot of it is sort of peer pressure. I'm not suggesting that universities are policing this. I'm not saying that at all. But there is certainly the perception among a lot of people that certain topics are radioactive and you're better off avoiding them.
So, there's just so much going on. So they want to ensure free speech. How are they going to do that?
Well, we won't know until March when you actually see what's in the legislation. Yeah. Both the Free Speech Union and the government, and this is the Minister of Science, Judith Collins, and he's currently Deputy Prime Minister David Seymour announced
having dinner with
today.
him. We met him. He's an amazing guy, like truly amazing guy. Genuinely impressed.
I've never met him, but anyhow, they issued an announcement from the Beehive, the government, that this legislation is going to be appearing in March. And the idea is that they want universities, I'm just trying to think exactly what it said, they want universities to have anonymous surveys of their staff. So in other words, you can keep a track of where this is heading, people's comfort in speaking up. And they want to ensure institutional neutrality. That seems to be in there, and I'm very pleased to see that. We just published an article on that this week.
I'm not sure what the carrot or the stick is. What's the stick?
They didn't mention the stick.
Well, you'd have to have a stick.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. And previously they mentioned that there would be some form of sanction, but they haven't said what that was. So I can't really comment on that. That's yet to be determined.
And so I guess if David was not involved in it, I'd be far more skeptical of the likelihood of its success. But so there could be what? So we don't know if it's sanctions. We don't know what it is. We're just hypothesizing. We're shooting in the dark.
I really don't know how they would operate this. There has been a lot going on about free speech in New Zealand universities over the past few. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
Right. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I mean, at my university, I've been involved in. I was on a committee that made recommendations towards a policy, That policy was sort of kicked around for a year by a committee, a different committee that was appointed by the Vice-Chancellor. It was tabled with our university senate, who rejected it, basically because we didn't think it secured academic freedom. And so we're going back. I mean, the Vice-Chancellor sort of felt that we should perhaps wait until we see what the government legislation is about. But what we are trying to do is collectively move towards a policy. And I think it's a really good idea for universities to demonstrate that academics are capable of coming up with their own robust policies rather than being forced into it by the government.
Wow, if I had heard that from an American, I would have literally laughed. So what is the what's your pitch for why universities need to have free speech? Like, let's say someone's listening to this and they don't care. Well, the people who listen to this podcast will definitely care. But like, what's your pitch to the quote unquote normie, just the person on the street? Like, why should they care if there's, I mean, many people, there are just certain things you shouldn't say, period. Certain beliefs you shouldn't hold, certain attitudes.
If I try to put my finger on exactly where I think the problem lies, it's activism within universities. And I mean, you know better than I do what happened in December last year with Elise Stefanik and the 3 college presidents, and what happened subsequently to that. And a lot of American universities are now really trying to dial back the ideological control almost of what's, of what happens in universities. In New Zealand, a lot of that is focused on what you call DEI. We call it equity here. And that's certainly an element of what's going on. And, that'd be an interesting thing to talk about.
So who do you discriminate against here? Not you, but the university systems. Who do they discriminate for and against? Because in the United States, they discriminate against Asians and for African Americans. Who are your discrimination group? You discriminate for the Indigenous peoples, so that must mean by definition, if there are a given number of slots, then someone has to be discriminated against by definition.
I wouldn't quite put it like that. I think the way it's normally couched, and I'm trying to steel man their argument here, as I'm sure you would encourage me to.
Please, 100%.
Street
100%.
epistemology and so on.
100%.
I think the way they would put it is that there are voices that are underrepresented, particularly Indigenous voices, and there are concerns that they may not have the opportunities or even perhaps the sort of the confidence to speak up. And the difficulty is that very quickly can slide into what I kind of want to call opportunism in a sense, because you can enforce particular narratives.
Okay, so going with you, so you'll steel man and I'll play the bad guy.
Okay.
So let's just say, because the math is easy, there are 100 slots.
Yeah.
And we want to have an equity-based argument to make room for people whose ancestors have been historically oppressed. Mm-hmm. So we will let in, say, 20% more of those people than would have normally gotten in. Now, let's say that translates numerically into 15 people. I think that's about what it is, but let's just say that's the case. That must mean 15 people who were qualified would not get in. And would that be random, or would that be on the basis of race or gender or trans status or some other protected, or non-protected class? Like, where would those 15 people be pulled from who wouldn't get in, who should have gotten in?
I don't think that's so much the issue here. It's not so much an issue of who gets in. It's more an issue of the politicization of various ideas, and particularly how that relates to politics at large in the country. And, you can get into the weeds pretty quickly on this, and I don't know how far down that rabbit hole you want to go, so to mix metaphors.
I'm still not clear. So there are just so there's no fixed limit on how many people can get it. So if you're just letting certain people in who are underqualified and not getting in, and there's nobody That's
not the problem. That's not the problem. The reason for historical, if I can say that the reason for historical underrepresentation is a complex problem that that is best seen through things like the usual socioeconomic status, opportunities, how well you've done it at school before you come to university, and all of those sorts of things. So in a way, trying to address this through entry at university is a bit like trying to fix a water shortage, a water crisis, by installing more taps.
Yeah.
That doesn't fix the problem. There has been a lot of focus on the idea that universities, quote unquote, Western constructs, that this is sort of getting into decolonization ideology.
Love that.
You love it.
I just had Elizabeth on the show the other day.
Did she talk about that?
She did. That woman is amazing.
Yeah, I've known Elizabeth for quite some time.
She's amazing.
She works in the education space. I'm a scientist. But what I mean really is the idea that there's sort of institutional problems, institutional bias that needs to be overcome by forcing the university down particular directions in terms of, and this relates directly to free speech. This has been raised directly in terms of how it might interact with how we word a policy, for example, on academic freedom and freedom of expression on campus. And those are two separate issues.
Yeah. So if you look at the stats on universities in the United States, they overwhelmingly skew to the left in terms of the professoriate. Is that the case here?
Oh, yeah.
So you can talk about free speech all you want until you have ideological diversity. It's unclear to me what motivations the people occupying the positions would have, given that they have an ideological agenda.
I don't think you can really compare us to the States.
Okay.
I mean, I follow the States quite closely through podcasts like yours, etc. And
that's a great podcast.
So, I mean, here, what would be called our main centre-right party would be much more similar to the Democrats than the Republicans.
Right. Same in England.
In terms of social policy. Yeah. So there's really nobody. There was a recent, just to give you an idea, I saw a survey recently that was mentioned in an article where somebody had asked people before the US election who they would vote for, and something like only 2 out of 10 people said that they would vote Republican. So New Zealanders, I wouldn't say, I mean, we're certainly not represented by, I think sort of moderate Democrats would be about where most people sit. In the universities, it is overwhelmingly sort of left-wing.
Have you had to do, like, as a scientist, DEI statements, and how does your work forward diverse? Okay, so that's...
No, but we've got, for a number of years, we've been operating under what's called vision mātauranga in most research proposals. So this came into being in about 2007, and I had no problem with it at all. It's the idea that with public-funded research, government-funded research that is public good, so it's supposed to have some sort of applied outcome, it needs to benefit Māori, who are the Indigenous people of New Zealand. And I don't have a problem with that at all. And there are 4 different streams of that. Some of that could involve direct Māori involvement, but because Māori are underrepresented in universities for a whole variety of reasons, there just aren't the people involved. So, for example, if, I mean, some of the work I do relates to topics like, say, heavy metal chemistry or metabolic physiology and so on, you'd be hard-pressed to find qualified people who could be involved in that. But that part of it is not enforced. The main idea and the thing that I support is that if it's taxpayer funded research, then everybody in New Zealand should benefit from it.
So look, okay, so I'm just trying to think, what's it called again? Mātauranga
Māori.
Mātauranga Māori.
Yeah. Mātauranga is loosely translated sort of knowledge. And what I was talking about is vision mātauranga, which is a policy. Mātauranga Māori is Māori knowledge.
Is there any such thing as Indigenous knowledge or Māori knowledge?
Yes, that's Mātauranga Māori.
What do the Māori know that nobody else knows?
I can give you some examples.
Please.
So Māori developed I should preface this by saying I'm not an expert, but I've been fortunate to talk to a number of Mātauranga scholars, including my friend Mere Roberts, who's taught at a wānanga. A wānanga is a Māori, like the equivalent of a Māori university. And these are the places that were actually designed to preserve and teach Mātauranga Māori. One of the things that you need to understand about Mātauranga Māori is that it's very place dependent. And what that means is that knowledge of one iwi or tribe or sub-tribe, hapu, is specific to that region. And one example that was told to me is Māori would know that particular group of fish spawn when in one part of the country the karaka tree flowers, and further south it's when the kowhai flowers. And so they have this very complex seasonal calendar called maramataka, which preserves and sort of stores and transmits this knowledge that was essential to survival, really. It relates to when you harvest, when you plant, fishing, all sorts of things.
So isn't it racist to consider knowledge tied to certain groups? We don't say that about white people knowledge.
Well, we don't, and this is kind of where I got involved a few years ago, because there was a policy that came into effect in 2020 by the previous government called mana orite, which mana means sort of respect, value, and orite I think means something like equal. Although we're quite interested in the etymology of exactly what this meant. But the idea was that Mātauranga Māori knowledge should be considered equivalent to science. And there was a push at that stage to introduce Mātauranga Māori into science class at both secondary school and universities.
Is it subject to the same process of falsification, hypothesis testing, etc.? Or do we just accept it as?
Well, I think it's very different to science, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's an issue. What I do want to make very clear is that we, a group of us, and I started talking to people about this a number of years ago, and a few of us became increasingly concerned, particularly because there were statements like science is a tool of colonization.
Seems like just a power grab to me, or no?
Well, the way we were looking at it is that we wanted to ensure that Māori kids had the same opportunities to pursue interests in science and develop a career in science as anybody else. And so that sort of politicisation of it, that sort of weaponisation of it through decolonisation ideology, I think was a real problem.
Yeah, it seems like a Mott and Bailey. I mean, the other thing is if you really wanted to say that there are certain things, Māori knowledge and that the Māori invented them, then that leads to a kind of, I sincerely think it would be horrific for the self-esteem of people. Can you imagine if you just literally walked around everything you did and said, oh, that's Māori knowledge? Almost everything would be white knowledge. Almost everything would be the answers, phones, like literal writing. I mean, it would be incredibly detrimental for the self-esteem of people if you want to say these fringe things or Māori. I just think it is a very, very dangerous precedent to set. And I also think it's racist when you claim that certain things are a kind of knowledge given to a privileged racial group.
One of the things one of the stories that was told to me very early on when I was fortunate enough to speak to a very well-known Mātauranga Māori scholar. He told me that he was working in the Alexander Turnbull Library in Wellington and came across a manuscript.
We were there, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. A manuscript from the 19th century in te reo, in the Māori language. that was an analysis of military tactics that were used in the Franco-Prussian War.
Okay.
And I thought, this is a completely novel, unique perspective on,
Totally.
in this case, European tactics. And that gave me a lot of insight into the value of Mātauranga Māori, because it is so different. It's developed largely in isolation, at least for 800 or so years from other people. And so I think it is certainly very valuable, and we can gain lots of insights from it. The problem exists where we try and say that it's equal to what they're now calling other ways of knowing or other forms of knowledge, which and that sort of framing, that ways of knowing framing is being forced into our science classes, which I think is a really bad idea.
Okay. Well, I obviously agree with you with that, but I'm going to push back on what you just said about the book Mātauranga. Pronounce that again?
Mātauranga Māori.
Mātauranga Māori. Isn't it just knowledge from one scholar?
No, because
it's not individualist, not collective.
I mean, it's
collectivist.
Well, as I said, it is place specific. So different sub-tribes, hapu and tribes, iwi, will have their own mātauranga. And this is what, so in other words, different tribes will disagree on a particular thing, and partly that might be because it's different in their part of the country. So there are differences. But this is all orally transmitted, because Māori until didn't have a written language. So it was all orally transmitted, and a lot of it is contained in the form of pūrako, which are sort of stories linked to a framework called whakapapa, which is I'm probably going to get into trouble.
History or something.
Whakapapa is almost like a family tree, but it's not. Although some people liken it to a phylogeny, like an evolutionary tree.
Yeah.
It's much more based. It sort of ultimately goes into the spiritual realm, into Ranganui, Papatuanuku, the gods, effectively. And the way things are split up are in ways that are quite different to the way we do it in science. For example, Kauri trees, I don't know if you've seen a Kauri, but I can't see any out the window, but they're huge trees, a huge sort of southern type of gymnosperm conifer. They are held to be related to whales, because they both sort of produce, Kauri trees produce gum, like oil, and
held
whales
by
have oil.
who holds them that way?
This is in Māori law.
Okay.
So they have a kinship that way. Another good example is Kiori, the rats that came to New Zealand, were brought to New Zealand by Māori. They sit in the same area as kumara, sweet potato, because Kiori would hang around kumara pits where kumara was stored. So there are all of these complex ecological relationships that are in there too. So it's just a very different way of looking at things.
Yeah, there was a movie a few years ago, or maybe a long time now, about a team of bobsledders from Jamaica.
Yeah.
So I guess you could find people who have views on things, and there's just a different way to look at it. I'm thinking about, Western warfare or siege engines, or the example. I haven't read the book about which you were speaking, but I would say that's a perspective, and many of those perspectives offer insight, but is it knowledge?
I think it's interesting to get different, unique perspectives. I mean, there's a fairly good argument that Māori...
Cool Runnings, that was
Cool Runnings, that's the movie, yeah. There's a fairly good argument that Māori actually invented trench warfare, because they would build fortified pa villages, and they would have quite complex trench systems and fortifications. And these are the sorts of things that ended up being used in the First World War particularly, and so on. So Māori were aware of these sorts of things. I'm a more of a sort of a Second World War history buff than earlier periods. But what struck me about this particular example is it just highlights a perspective that is not. it's not something that I would have thought about, that you could have a perspective on something that you would think is more familiar to us, but from a completely unique perspective. And this is just one of the reasons why I'm a great supporter of Mātauranga Māori scholarship. I think that is very important.
Okay. So now that you have this perspective, but you have this perspective as someone who's not Maori.
Right.
So a non-Maori can hold the perspective.
I'm not speaking as a Maori, of course. I mean, my great grandparents are buried in this country, so my family goes back a ways here. So I kind of don't really have anywhere else to go. It's not like I just got off the last boat or anything. But I think the problem has come about because these things that we should all value and that have their place, and I think this is why we have wānanga to teach this. I'm very comfortable with all New Zealanders, let's say New Zealand school kids or university students having some understanding of Mātauranga Māori. I've got no problem with that at all. What I do have a problem with is teaching it as science, because I think that does a disservice to both science and Mātauranga Māori because they're so different.
How would Mātauranga Māori, what would it be taught as, just like history?
I think it should be taught kind of as its own thing. I mean, it's really cultural anthropology. It could be taught as that. I mean, at secondary school, it could be taught through social studies or something like that.
And would it be taught in terms of because in science, we teach in terms of things being provisionally true.
Sure.
Would this be taught in terms of a description? At time A, people B believed proposition P or something? I probably can't answer that with authority. I don't. The one thing that I have been told by Māori scholars is the importance of Mātauranga Māori being taught in an appropriate place, in an appropriate way, by the appropriate people. And I do not think that universities fit that description. And there is an opportunity cost to doing this. Of course.
Because, one of us, and we had a big row about this at my university earlier this year, because if you're going to teach this as science, you are necessarily having to reduce the science curriculum that you teach.
So I just find this to be fascinating. I mean, so would this be just taught like an hour a day? Like when would it be taught? Like what?
The idea was, and this is such a movable feast, it's almost impossible to answer that definitively. There were all different sorts of ideas. I mean, in the beginning, when we started talking about this in my school in biological sciences back in 2016, and the idea back then was that we were going to be teaching it in all our courses. And you can think, if you're teaching, for example, conservation ecology, you could talk about various Māori practices like rahui, for example. Rahui is like a fishing ban.
Did you say all the classes? Teaching it all the classes?
All our classes. Now, that is not what's actually happened, but that was one of the suggestions originally. So in conservation ecology, you can see that you could talk about various Māori practices. As I said, rahui, which is a fishing ban, so that's one conservation measure. There are other sort of sustainable approaches that Māori used that you could talk about. So that's a context.
Okay. So yeah.
But the obvious example, if you want to teach metabolism or Krebs cycle in biochemistry, aerobic metabolism, it's hard to see how you could fit Mātauranga Māori into that. But the biggest issue, I think, is this idea that we should think of these things as equivalent, because I don't think that's fair to either.
Okay, so let's linger on this for a moment. And I just find this to be fascinating. So just run with me down this for a moment. Just go with it. How many hours is the school day?
Are you talking about secondary school?
Yeah. Well, roughly. Is it
6?
Okay.
Something like
All right,
that.
let's say it's 6 hours.
5.
The number of hours you would teach in terms of percentage of Mātauranga Maori would, to me, indicate, well, what would it indicate to you? Like, let's say half of the day was Mātauranga Maori,
Well,
and the
it's
other
not.
half.
Nobody's suggested anything like that. So I think that it would
Oh,
be
an hour a day?
in the interest. I don't even think it would be that. But the idea was, and what was attempted is to introduce some Mātauranga Māori concepts into science class. And Nick, my friend Nick Matsky, who's in my department, who you met,
Yeah.
he's he's a real expert on how this has been integrated into our secondary school curriculum. And what happened was secondary school teachers had a big problem with it, not least because they didn't feel qualified to teach it, which is perfectly reasonable.
So we had to take a little break. Sorry about that. The sun was burning my back and there's no AC in here. So one of the things you said on the break is, well, you say what you said on the break. People might be upset with you or something, or what?
Well, I think there'll be people who will say that I've got no business sort of explaining to you things about maramataka and various Mātauranga Māori concepts. And I can see that argument. But
I can't see it. What's the argument?
Well,
That would mean that
they
your
would
knowledge
say
is
that. Well,
linked
they
to
would
your
say
race.
correct, and that is an argument. They'll say that. I mean, I'm not teaching people about this, and I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'm just trying to present the idea that I think Mātauranga Māori is valuable, but it's its own thing. And so I think it needs to have a proper context.
But why would they be upset with you? I'm not getting like. I don't see how you can get around the fact that these people actually believe, or maybe they don't actually believe it. Maybe it's just verbal protestations or virtue signaling. Whatever. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they don't believe. But at some level, they're making the claim that the knowledge that one possesses is tied to their race.
Correct.
Okay. Well, we have a word for that. That's called racist. They're racist.
You could call this racial essentialism.
I don't think someone could give me a single example of a case, unless you want to claim some kind of weird radical incommensurability or radical identitarian-based relativistic bizarre form of epistemological constructivism. I can't think of a single case, not one single example, where something known, quote unquote, known by one race can't be known by something outside the race. The moment, like this is the philosopher Donald Davidson's argument, once it's translated into language, that's it. It's like the myth of the framework, Popper's myth of the framework.
And that, I think, has to be the way universities operate, and this is one of the reasons why I think trying to teach Mātauranga Māori at universities is inherently problematic.
Why are people afraid to call these people out as racist? I don't get it.
Oh, well, I'm the racist.
Why are you the racist?
Well, so I'm told.
But what is it? I don't get it.
I mean, you know as well as I do that that's just chucked around.
Yeah.
You know, and this is we were all called racists after we published this article in 2021, the listener letter. And I knew this was going to happen. I said to the others, the appropriate response to this. I've read John McWhirter's book,
Woke racism.
Yeah. And I just said the appropriate response is to say, you know, I'm quite happy with Sam Harris's definition of racism. It's bigotry expressed through the lens of race, and that's not what we're doing. In actual fact,
That's what they're doing. The iron law of woke projection never ceases to hit. It just never fails.
Yeah, well, but these things are weaponized, and they have been used. I mean, this is, I think, a large part of the reason why we have a free speech problem at universities in New Zealand, going back to where we started.
Because why?
Well, because these topics are kind of radioactive. I can be called, I mean, we were called ignorant of Mātauranga Māori after the listener letter. And I had read a lot of papers on it, but I went out of my way, both before but particularly afterwards, to approach scholars of Mātauranga Māori and see if I could learn something about it. And as I keep stressing, I don't claim any expertise at all. But this is what you teach about street epistemology. I've read your book with James Lindsay. And
unbelievable. He's now one of the favorite guests of the show.
So, this is what you suggest we do, right?
Yeah.
You know, so you try and ask questions,
Right.
and you try and see why people think the way they do,
Right.
and you work from there. I mean, part of the problem is I don't think we can meet in the middle on this, because I think there are fundamental differences in terms of the way university has to function. A lot of this, I think, has nothing to do, a lot of the problem has nothing to do, and I want to make this really clear, nothing to do with Māori and nothing to do with Mātauranga Māori. It's to do with sort of politics and activism and what people think the function of universities is. And this is Jonathan Haidt's idea about the telos of universities.
Social justice or truth, So those folks, the folks who argue that Mātauranga Māori should be placed in science or incorporated within the science curricula, they're saying it's social justice. So they want to fashion the curricula and what the institutions are used for to create certain social outcomes, and even certain epistemological outcomes. But you're saying something else. You're saying that you think the function of the university should be, as Haidt says, truth-based, where he actually doesn't make that argument, but that's what he believes in that talk.
Yeah. I mean, I can see, I think there would be, a lot of Mātauranga Māori has been lost. And, it is important, while older people are still around, to try and capture as much of that as possible. And there are people I know who are keen on doing that. But we have to kind of face the fact that universities are Western institutions.
Can Mātauranga Māori be wrong?
There are kind of two ways to look at that question. So do you mean, would people admit that it can be wrong, or do I think it could be factually incorrect? I mean, Mātauranga Māori is just knowledge. It contains all sorts of things, from basket weaving to how to catch eels to a lot of in-depth natural history knowledge.
So it's just like craft work. So it's just like a preferred way to weave a basket. Yeah, why would anybody have a problem with that?
Well, nobody would have a problem with that, but
I like my baskets with double weaves. Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. I'm okay. Yeah, it's a preference. But once you're claiming to know it, then are they claiming that it's the best way to do things? Is it like
I don't. Yeah, it's difficult for me to respond to questions like that because I don't want to put words in other people's mouths.
God, well, I'm more than happy to have them on the show, although Reed's leaving tomorrow.
Yeah.
Reed has actual people who love him in his life.
Okay, so this is one of the things that we found most difficult, and I mentioned this to you on Saturday night, which is the idea that
we were partying hardcore.
No, we weren't. We were discussing weighty matters. You mean?
We were. Yeah.
So we, on numerous occasions, have tried to interact with people. For example, my Vice-Chancellor, after the listener letter, and this is back in August 2021, the letter came out at the end of July that year, promised that we would have a symposium on the relationship between Mātauranga Māori and science.
Wow, that's fantastic. Good
It's never
for him.
happened.
Wait, what?
It's never happened.
How did you contact them? Through email?
How did I? Oh, yes, people have been contacted through email. I mean,
they could have all got lost, all the emails.
I don't think so. But on various occasions,
that's what people have accused me of. Yeah. Every time I try to get people who are identitarian leftists on the show, I'm told that all the emails got lost.
Right. Well, but it didn't get lost if you get a response saying I'm not interested. So we had a function on the future of New Zealand universities in May this year, and I was asked to provide a list of people who thought very differently to me.
Oh, good.
And
did you?
I supplied that list, and
Okay.
these people were invited, and none of them came along.
That's just shocking news to me. Why didn't they come along?
Well, you have to ask them.
Well, they don't. By definition, you can't ask them because they won't tell you.
The consequence of this is two things, both of which are sort of negative consequences in my view. I kind of call this self-exclusion. The first one is that you can delegitimise the process. So you say they didn't represent Māori voices, so Māori voices weren't represented in this, whatever it was, symposium, discussion, whatever. So it's not legitimate. You haven't actually, you know. The other is that they are then denying other people the chance to challenge what they're saying.
So I do not want to put words. I just want to be crystal clear. So you're telling me with total sincerity, you've tried to talk to these people.
No, let's just be clear. These people, I'm talking about people of a more sort of activist bent. I'm not talking, as I said.
Yeah.
I have.
Not Maori. No. I'm not. The activists.
A number of Maori people have been very generous with me, and I've been privileged to be able to learn from them.
How come you didn't invite them to the symposium?
Well, that's
because some of them have academic credentials.
Well, Mary does. Mary has a PhD in parasitology, and she's taught at a wānanga. So a wānanga is the equivalent. It's equivalent. It's a tertiary education institute, equivalent to a university, but they're run by and for Māori, and there are several of them in New Zealand. So if you want to study Mātauranga Māori and be taught in a te reo, in the Māori language, in a Māori environment, you can go to a wānanga. So as I said, I'm not generalising here, but what I'm talking about is the people who, for example, attacked us after the listener letter.
So let's talk about this, because this was a massive deal in New Zealand. Many people outside of New Zealand, some have heard of it, some have not heard of it, but this was created massive waves here. Can you give us the 60-second version of this? I know it's a lot.
60 seconds.
Yeah, I know it's a lot.
So we were concerned about two things. One I've already mentioned.
Who's we?
Well, in the beginning, it was my friend Mike Corbelis, who was a professor in psychology, a very, very distinguished man who taught Steven Pinker. And
he passed away recently.
He passed away in November 2021. He didn't know it, but he already must have had lymphoma when the listener letter was published. And Garth Cooper, Elizabeth Rata, and we had been discussing this. And Mike, we were concerned particularly. I mean, really, what triggered this was seeing the statement that science is a tool of colonisation.
Yeah.
And we accepted the fact that Māori were underrepresented in universities and in science. We were very supportive of trying to address that underrepresentation, but we felt you're not going to encourage Māori kids to get into science if you tell them it's a tool of colonisation. So that was part of it. The other part was teaching Mātauranga Māori as science. And we thought that was a problem because of the distinctiveness of the two. And so we wrote this thing, which is, Mike and a philosopher called Robert Nola, who you knew.
Yeah.
I mean, he died a couple of years ago. It's no accident that most of these people retired. I was by quite some, I think the youngest of the people that signed this. There were 7 of us, and so there are 5 of us left now. But it was just a letter to the New Zealand Listener, which is a national weekly magazine.
It caused a furor.
Yeah. Well, two colleagues of mine from Auckland University set up an open letter that was signed by over 2,000 people condemning us. And yeah, I mean, we were attacked uphill and down dale, and they believe that science is a tool of colonist oppressors, or what? Well, the open letter didn't say that. What it said was that, what we'd done was deeply shameful, and saying that Mātauranga Māori isn't equivalent to science, and this was a huge problem.
But they believe that science is equivalent. So you said it before, but I lost it. Science is colonialist, or what did you say?
Well, what had appeared at a Māori school in the curriculum was the idea that science was a tool of colonization.
Okay, so here's my question to you. If science is a tool of colonization, we could make a quick syllogism out of this, and colonization is bad, therefore science is bad. But let's just say science is a tool of colonization. Like, if someone really believed that, when they had dental pain, why do they keep going to the doctor? To the dentist?
It's almost impossible to rationalize your way out of these arguments.
Nobody's forcing them to go to the dentist.
No, I know.
If there were, then I would say there's a political problem infringing on people's liberties. Like, if you want to suffer from dental pain and not go to the dentist, because your ideology tells you that that's some kind of colonizer oppression, 100%, I am completely with you. You're 18, we do not have to force people to go to dentists. But because they do go to the dentists when they have tooth pain, that tells me something. That tells me that they don't believe that.
I think what this was really about was the idea that if we say that Mātauranga Māori isn't equivalent to science, that is somehow seen as a slur. And that's never the way we saw it. That was the implication that people took, that we were having, that basically we were saying that Māori knowledge, or Māori in particular, were inferior. Garth actually is Māori. He has his. Yeah.
So, but that problem is created by the people who believe that only certain individuals of certain races can possess certain knowledge. That's the wellspring of that problem.
Yeah, I think so. So this, as you say, there was a huge. It was a giant moral panic, and I was within a week removed from teaching first-year classes and second-year classes, evolution classes. I've to this day I've never mentioned Mātauranga Māori in a class, so it's not like I was running around saying anything. But it was just felt that I shouldn't be put in front of students anymore because it was, I was such a big old racist.
So I guess I still have a few more questions. So if a conflict does emerge between Mātauranga Māori and something in, say, biology or chemistry, to the extent that Mātauranga Māori spills into that domain, the folks who are advocating this be contained within science, which side, this is a variation of Eric Weinstein's question, which side would they err on? Because clearly there have to be some, even for it to be considered in science, they have to have some propositions that are considered empirical. And so...
Well, as I said, Mātauranga Māori is a mixture of all sorts of things, including a whole lot of empirical information that is real, verifiable natural history. So...
and if there was something that wasn't verifiable, would that... So let me tell you a story. So years ago, when I taught at a university, I will not name a university I resigned from. Someone gave me a really interesting presentation. And his presentation, he was a professor in the philosophy department, and he told this group, I don't know how many people were there, like 80, 90 people, but it was a substantial thing from around the university, that he wanted in Native American classes taught Native American epistemology, Native American philosophy. And it was very interesting to me. And then someone asked a question in the audience that I will never forget. And the question was, well, what do we do if we don't agree with this? I'm not comfortable as a settler or a colonizer. I think he said a settler. Maybe he said both. I can't remember, so long ago. But I'm not comfortable making that criticism. So basically, they wanted to exempt this one thing from the tools that apply to literally everything else in the discipline: Socratic questioning, examination, and then the other thing that emerged from that was that the guy giving the presentation said, and he's a nice guy. I thought he's a very, very reasonable guy who suffers from very deep-seated ideological. The rot had hit him. He said that eventually they need to. He just wants to teach this for a semester or two until they can find a Native American. I mean, and I didn't want to be the guy who raised my hand and say, "What the fuck are you talking?" Like, because if I'm that guy and say, "Well, that's racist," or "Why do we exempt this from philosophy?" or like, then I become the guy who hates Native Americans. And I see that as a parallel to you, because I was looking some stuff up about the listener letter. Man, they went after you, boy, like the nastiness that came for you, accusing you of all kind of heinous racial stuff. But it seems to me to be just the opposite.
Well, it was very interesting because
It's a nice way to put it.
well, yeah. I mean, as they say, you certainly find out who your friends are.
Yeah. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Well, the thing that, looking back on it, that concerns me most about it is that although it's kind of held up by people like the Free Speech Union, Jonathan and so on, as
These guys are great.
as a
Fantastic.
sure, but as a real sort of litmus test of academic freedom and free speech in New Zealand, there also is an extent to which it must have harmed both of those, in the sense that people looked at the way people reacted to us and thought, I don't want to go there.
Oh, you mean because they would be part of the mob?
No, they would say, I'm going to keep my mouth shut because I don't want to end up like them.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. I apologize. Yeah. So if they said anything, there'd be a pile up, a cancellation, any one of a number of things that could have happened. And so the tactics of the activists worked. Bully you, harass you, and then other people won't come to your defense.
Well, it's exactly, it's like nice career you've got there, be a pity if something happened to it. That's exactly what it is. I mean, I've had, one of my graduate students was told by somebody senior to her not to have nothing to do with me anymore. I mean, she did. but that's nevertheless what she was told.
Yeah, that's interesting.
There have been people I've heard of people being told that none of us would ever get funded in New Zealand again.
Yeah.
And you just never know. I mean, but the other thing is that a lot of people came up to us privately and say, good on you, I completely agree with you, but I'm not saying it in public.
Yeah, that's what happens.
That's
Did your colleagues ever, as it happened to me, did your colleagues ever tell students to not take your classes?
It's hard to kind of determine that.
Oh, some of my ex-students told me that.
I'm pretty sure that happened because, there was one of the two people who launched that open letter against us came out and said that students should boycott our classes.
Right. And so in my case, what happened was that then that was weaponized against me to try to claim that. I mean, so the whole thing is like they're out to get you. And anything you say, as opposed to what we've done in the academy for the longest time. If someone didn't like the listener letter, you know what they should have done? They should have published a response to it. Ideally in the same venue, but doesn't have to be.
Well, there were tons of responses to it.
Well, then why do they need to attack you then?
Well, yeah, because they wanted to express their. It was virtue signaling.
I'm a member of this tribe.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Well, I want to be on the right side of history, and
the right side of that's a commonality. That's a common theme.
Yeah. So there was a lot of that. But another thing that I think I said to you earlier is, at the time, I did not see this as a brave thing to do. My main feeling on it was that I would be very ashamed if I didn't sign it because I had such enormous respect for, at the time, Mike and Garth in particular.
And you were doing a disservice to your students. That's always how I felt.
I kind of felt I was sticking up for science. And there have been a number of people, Richard Dawkins, Jerry Coyne and Lawrence Krauss and others, who came out and were very kind and supportive. But, I think sometimes I just felt it was doing the right thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Well,
I mean, it's...
I could put it this way. I think, a number of the people who wrote the letter were already retired. Some of us weren't.
Did anybody apologize to you?
A couple of the people who signed it, one of them said that they wished they hadn't. Another one said that they'd regret it for the rest of their lives. But not many. It's quite strange how it goes in the school. I mean, a lot of the people who signed that, I just can't be bothered having anything to do with anymore.
That's why should you?
But a lot of them just sort of now want to behave, because I haven't done anything that actually suggests I'm racist, either before or since.
So that's just a game they play.
Well, I know
that's
it's
just a game they play.
I know
It's
it's
just
a game
power
they play,
grab.
but I think over time, once the moral panic has subsided, they might not be big enough to sort of apologise, but not that would really make much difference anyway, but they probably sort of feel, well, let's just move on. And I kind of think we should move on, but
I wonder about that.
But this is getting back to the legislation. This is why this is, I think, really important, because it would be good if people weren't subjected to this sort of stuff.
That would just be the minimum. That'd be the minimum. And
because that's what we require to make sure, street epistemology, that we make the best decisions based on reason and empirical evidence.
Do not block the road of inquiry.
Yep.
So maintain the means of error correction. So David Seymour is aiding in that. Did Jonathan, the Free Speech Union, did they have anything to do with that?
Yeah, I don't know all the details.
Oh, okay.
It appears that the Free Speech Union, they have certainly been advocating for it.
Are you optimistic about the future of New Zealand universities?
I really don't know. I sort of it depends. It's sort of some days I am, some days I'm not. I think the rubber's really going to hit the road over this legislation next year. We'll see how universities react. One really positive sign was my university's Senate rejecting a very poor free speech policy. We gave them a good set of recommendations, and I want to acknowledge the enormous patience and wisdom of Sir Peter Hunter, who chaired the working group. But he actually published a dissent. Well, he didn't publish it, but he wrote a dissent to the policy that was tabled before Senate before the vote, and the Vice-Chancellor read it out. So he didn't agree with it. Let's just hope that, particularly given the legislation, that the university realises that we can't operate in an environment that doesn't respect academic freedom, and I think institutional neutrality is a critical element of that. And a lot of this...
And if they don't recognize that, then what? If they keep on going business as usual year after year, then what?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are a number of questions I wanted to ask you in this conversation. Okay, so one of them, and this is sort of the $64,000 question for me, is how do you distinguish between scholarship and activism in a university?
There's a lot of ways, but one way is, do the types of the articles, are they falsifiable? Are they putting forth conclusions that can be falsified? Is it done with empirical methodologies? Is it mixed methods? Is it a quantitative, a qualitative analysis? Being crystal clear about that, seeing if individual journals have articles that run counter to the narrative, which,
they don't.
Well, no, they don't. They don't.
They don't.
But that doesn't mean that you publish a piece about the flat Earth if you're in a geology magazine. That goes more for the soft sciences. I mean, I personally think that the whole system needs to be completely rethought. The peer review system, the publishing system, promotion and tenure, entire disciplines have become unhinged from reality. I mean, I've been screaming about the same stuff over and over again for years, but do we try to falsify the conclusions? What are the, and then one of the things that I find in disciplines that are not robust as very small sample sizes and then making these wild speculative inferences that people attempt to universalize. I think that's a big problem.
Idea laundering.
Ooh, you've done your homework. Yes.
I've done my homework, baby.
Yes, you've done your homework. Yeah, so I think that ideal. I just published something, the WPATH pile. Colin Wright has written about this extensively. Mia Hughes and others, Christina Buttons, Leo Shapiro from Manhattan, all from Manhattan Institute, almost all have written about this. You know, the WPATH, the path from.
Oh, I've got that report. That just came out quite recently.
It's fascinating how it was laundered down. So I think there are ways to deal with this. Oh, and that's the other thing, I mentioned all the time. Nobody cares about this either. There's a replication crisis in psychology, 50% of the papers. There's a replication crisis in economics, 60%. Nobody gives a shit. Okay, well, fuck it. Then great. You make rules for the society based upon something that's a coin toss. That's basically what you're doing. You don't care? Okay. You can not care all you want. That's great. You can play the I don't care game, but if you're going to institute public policies, particularly economic policies, do not complain when they fail.
So the other thing that's happened recently in New Zealand that was announced by the Minister of Science, since 2007, the Humanities and Social Sciences were funded through what's called the Marsden Fund, which is a research fund that was administered by the Royal Society.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had 6 Marsden grants over the years, but that was supposed to be a basic research fund. It was originally all science, and then they let the humanities and social sciences into it.
Oh, God.
Well, I think humanities and social sciences should be funded, but the difficulty was, to be blunt,
they're ideologically captured.
I think some of the panels were, absolutely. And I think they were that they were funding things that was little, essentially just sort of none of the things that you just talked about in terms of distinguishing scholarship and activism.
Yeah, I mean, just that one little thing. I probably said this like 50 times. Like, okay, listen, if you want to put on a conference, great, you put on a conference. If you absolutely have to have a panel, which there's really no reason you need a panel at all. But if you have to have a panel, put on someone who dissents from the panel. Like, all of these panels in which everybody's agreeing with each other is a huge circle jerk. It does nothing. It demeans the credibility of the panel and what they're trying to do. So I don't know, those to me are narrative forwarding. They're just, they seem conspicuously agenda driven.
Did anybody point you towards the videos available online, I think, the free speech event that Victoria University held earlier in the year that both Jonathan Ayling and Michael Johnston...
Oh, yes.
Did you watch that?
Yes. No, I didn't, but I have that.
Well, when it was announced that Jonathan Ayling, who's the CEO of the Free Speech Union, that he was going to be on the panel, he is. He's terrific.
I can't believe he's 29.
Apparently, this was so traumatizing that this was going to be held in the university quad at Victoria University, which is where I'm from, Wellington, which is where I did my undergraduate degree. But so that quad is covered over now, and the problem was that because they were holding this event there, what would happen if some students walked through while Jonathan was talking?
Oh my God!
What would happen? He might say something. Yeah, I mean,
I can't. Maybe they would have a heart attack. They could have a brain aneurysm if they heard something that
this was just, I mean, if you could be put in a time machine and go back 20 years, people just would struggle to believe that the university administrators would actually take these things seriously. Yeah. But they did.
So, that's another answer to your question about what can be done. We can slash the salaries of university administrators and presidents because they have once you have high salaries, you have more of a motivation to keep your job, and then you're held hostage to students and their parents.
Yes.
Or we can directly tie university presidents' salaries not to the board of trustees or what have you, but to how much money they bring in. I mean, there are so many solutions. Like, we're paying university presidents as if we're paying Fortune 500 CEOs.
Well, my vice chancellor gets paid more than the prime minister.
Okay, well, so he has a built-in motivation to make sure that
my it's probably gets a sexist of you. My vice chancellor is a she.
Okay, well, she probably gets a parking space on top of it. And to boot. No, I mean, there are a lot of things that we can do. Now since I made that mistake, Reed, I'm going to have to talk about she's all the time now. Oh, we had dinner with the Minister of Justice. I couldn't believe that this guy is walking around without a bodyguard. I was just shocked by that. Like, you could never do that in the U.S. Like, you're telling me that the Attorney General of the whole country is going to walk around, just come to dinner, walk around, hang out in a supermarket.
If you come to Waiheke,
yeah, I'm going to come and visit you. I'm going to come.
Yeah. I will walk you past our Prime Minister's beach house.
No way.
Yeah, way. It's just down the hill.
Wow. Well, we're going to drink wine. The other thing, Jonathan, Reed and I had some drinks with Jonathan.
Yeah.
He really knows wine. He brought some delicious rosé, like killer rosé.
Yeah. Yeah, I've tried that.
Yeah. He calls it freedom. What is it? Liberty wine.
Yeah. Is it Liberty Blush?
Yeah, that's right. Liberty Blush. Yeah.
Yeah.
For rosé. So two things. Is there anything you want to ask me at all about anything?
I'm interested. I mean, you're a philosopher and I'm not. And, I learned a lot from Robert Nola.
Oh, yeah.
Who was a fantastic philosopher of science. And it was great to be able to get on the phone and ask him questions.
Yeah.
Like, what's the difference between racial essentialism and social constructivism? Because this is one of the things that people will have differing opinions on in terms of, particularly if you're going to use a ways of knowing framework to teach science, and just say, I mean, it seems to me, how would you interpret that sort of a framing for science if you're saying we're going to teach science as one way of knowing? Is that social constructivism?
Okay, so let's back up and do the race realism, which is what it's commonly referred to, versus constructivism, or is race social construct. So I'll tell you another quick story, if I may.
Yep.
A student asked if I thought race was a valid biological category or construct, and I knew that the question was so toxic. So I thought I took the safest possible answer, and it truly is out of my expertise. I'm not a biologist.
Yep.
And I said, I'm an educator and a philosopher. I'm not a biologist. Go ask a biologist. And at the time, my cholesterol was high, so we were going on these walks. My physician told me to, be more active throughout the day. I figured out the problem, by the way. Once I got rid of dairy, that whole problem took care of itself. But so I pointed to the biology building and I said, I don't know, I'm an educator and a philosopher. Go ask a biologist. And I pointed to it. I was brought up in charges for saying I don't know. I was literally brought up on charges for saying I don't know.
Yeah, but you could have gotten in trouble either way, right?
Well, I would have thought that saying I don't know would be like the safest possible answer. Like, that's a great answer. But anyway, so what was your question again? Oh, constructivism. So yeah, it certainly could be the case that the way that we, in fact, I'm sure it probably is the case, to a certain extent, and it varies by locality, that the way we treat certain individuals, maybe we treat Sikhs a certain way if they have a turban, or dark people, what have you, that we construct narratives or stories and ideas about these people. They're not capable, stereotype effects, what have you. But we can those are empirical claims to which we can turn the tools of science. I mean, this is not, now if you're going to say that there's a kind of, race realism and that this IQ is related to race, those are specific claims, and we can study that and we can test that.
But if I push back against that by saying
anything you want,
that what you're effectively doing is, I mean, it might not be quite a Popperian framework, but it's close to it in terms of falsification. That's what you're talking about.
Well, that's what science is.
Yeah. But if that's said to be equivalent to another way of knowing that doesn't involve provisional truth and falsification, then
that's a disjunct to me. I don't mean to be insouciant. What do you mean?
Well, this is the whole. This is what I think is part of the real problem that we have in New Zealand as a result of this mana orete policy, which says Mātauranga Māori is to be considered equivalent to science.
But that's not.
It's certainly not.
That's not a constructivist issue. Well, the other thing is that's not up to politicians to say. It's also not a constructivist issue if, look, if you want to make the claim that African Americans in the United States context are pulled over more by the police,
Yeah.
and that's an empirical claim, and then you can say that there are certain things that are derivative of that or causally chained to that, like, I don't know, they have some kind of trauma. So I don't know what it would be, whatever the claim would be. There's no incompatibility between that and, I mean, not only is there no incompatibility, the way you figure out what's true is through science, not by appeals to.
But see, what some people might say is that what you're doing is that you're judging one knowledge system with the tools or the epistemology of another knowledge system.
How is, oh, you mean the lived experience? Like if I question live?
Yes.
Well, that's the good thing about science is it has jurisdiction in that domain. So you would always.
What domain? But this is the thing.
What do you mean?
Well, what people will say is that what you just said then is sort of imposing a Western colonial viewpoint on.
But it's my way of thinking about it is univocal. My way of thinking about it yields convergence.
Yeah.
And so that viewpoint, so there are a number of ways you can look at it. That viewpoint solves problems.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to adjudicate between, so what do we do if we have one black guy who's like, yep, I'm pulled over every time I get in the car. And then we have another black guy who's like, nope, I've never been pulled over and I'm like super black. In the United States, they call it driving while black. But so it basically resolves conflicts between ideas. It adjudicates between competing experiences.
The person who I think put this beautifully is Jonathan Rauch in The Constitution of Knowledge.
Yeah, he came down here on tour.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I met him. He's a terrific guy. So what he says in that book is that a functioning democracy needs to agree on a common set of facts. And what you've been saying, I've been playing devil's advocate, obviously.
No, that's fine.
I'm supposedly
that's good.
I actually that's the other thing that I thought I should bring up, that I actually have a day job, and that's as I was talking to Alan Davison last night, who you know.
He's phenomenal.
He's fantastic.
That guy is awesome. He's now he's an Australian. His background is in music.
Yeah, but don't hold that against him.
No, we
won't hold that.
No, I like people from islands. You're here. So the other thing is that no one gets final say or personal authority. Personal authority doesn't rule. That's one of the good things about science. But you're saying about Alan.
Yeah. So he was talking about the asymmetry in that where you're dealing with activists, particularly people. I mean, you know as well as I do that there are a certain set of departments in universities who are particularly prone to attack certain viewpoints, right?
Yeah, we know exactly who they are. Their gender studies is they're not even midwits, these people. They're not even midwits. They're just rank ideologues.
Okay, but the point that Alan was making is that they get to do this kind of as a day job. Whereas, what I was doing before I got in the car to come here and see you is trying to write a paper where I was trying to triangulate between stable isotope data, fatty acid data, and gut content data to determine the trophic partitioning, diet partitioning of coral reef fish. That's what I do for a day job, and that is all just empirical stuff. But so the point is, the free speech.
Well, they get to just make stuff up. They basically make stuff up that forwards an agenda for how they want to see the world.
They will say that they won't, but I think there's an awful lot of confirmation bias and motivated
reasoning.
Well,
they can say anything they want.
Yeah,
I mean, these are just not serious people, and we should not take.
Well, I know
they should not have a seat at the adult table.
but this is why I keep coming back to this issue of activism being a problem. A friend of mine who actually taught, who's a good scientist, he's in a psychology department, and said when I was talking to him about this, he said, "Well, I consider myself an activist," and I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I'm an activist." About the importance of climate change.
It's funny. I was going to say, I'm not sure all activism is bad. Bracket the climate change for a second. We could talk about that, climate emergencies, anthropogenic warming. But why couldn't one be an activist against corruption in the scholarship? That would seem, so as long as your epistemology precedes your activism, you're fine. You just have to make sure you're an activist for the right thing.
Exactly. What I said to him is, I wouldn't consider you an activist, because when you talk about this, it's empirical. What you're saying is empirically based.
So you think it's okay to be an activist for things that are falsifiable?
I mean, I don't. I mean, years ago, I can't remember why, but somebody approached me from Greenpeace and said, do you want to join Greenpeace? And I said no, because I felt that would. I mean, I work on fish. Not that anybody asks my opinion on things like marine conservation, but if they did, and I was associated with that sort of a point of view, then that might be seen as colouring my response as a scientist, which is what I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, 100%.
But there are what is kind of upsetting. That same approach is used against people like Jonathan Ayling, but the Free Speech Union sort of defends everybody. Lots of people they defend, they don't agree with. So it's not like they are taking an ideological position, but they and other institutions.
Yeah, they just came up with they supported the gangs for having the gang patches, and they're not members of gangs.
I know, but they get accused of being political when I don't think they are.
So, activism just means you want change. So you want to achieve a goal by a certain means. I'm not necessarily, I guess I'm a critical thinking activist, or an activist even when I was in the academy, to help people reason more clearly and calibrate their beliefs to the evidence.
So free speech is funny in this respect, because we could be said to be, people could say, well, both of us are free speech activists.
I'm okay
but
with
I
that.
don't.
I'm okay
But
with
we're not pushing an agenda other than the importance of free speech.
Oh, you mean we're not forwarding certain conclusions within the context?
No, we're not. We don't have an agenda
Yeah.
in particular other than advocating the importance of free speech.
I would say that another way that one can think about that is do not destroy the means of error correction.
Sure.
As a value.
Yep.
That's the value.
Yep.
So free speech that was one of the things I talked about in a few of my talks here, is free speech is just indispensable to making sure that the means of error correction are not interfered with. And so that allows people to, people have written about this for literally since the Enlightenment. Okay, cool. So did you want to ask me about anything else, or are we good? Because I have one final question.
Okay,
What should I have asked you that I didn't? Should I have asked you something else, or?
I don't think so. I mean, you'd know your audience better than I do. The main thing I'd want to say to people who will probably attack me for doing this is,
why will they attack you?
Well, for the reasons I said before, because I have dared to explain aspects, terms, and Mātauranga Māori,
but yet they will not come on the show. Of course, it's a little too late now because Reed's going home, but yet they themselves will not come on the show. So what would be? So that's just hollow. Their words are just hollow. That means nothing.
Yeah,
you just can't listen to these people.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to, but I think that just be charitable is I guess I think if we had more charitable conversations, treat people with respect. Don't prejudge people. Don't assume the worst of possible motives. All of those sorts of things. That sort of probably sounds sanctimonious.
No, it doesn't sound sanctimonious at all. I mean, I think that extending a hermeneutic of charity, or at least not. Okay, so there are levels to this, and there are degrees of this. I do think, and it's probably less so in New Zealand, more so in the United States, and certainly in England. God, there are just some nasty people out there. There are some nasty pieces of work. And I think that they gain great joy and maybe even social stature, or at least perceived social stature, by attempting to make others' lives miserable. I mean, I saw what people did to you for the listeners' letter.
Well, one thing that we haven't touched on, which was that article that's just come out with the Trump statement.
Oh yeah, I thought that was amazing. I did a Peter Reacts to the Trump statement. And that article is something like, I love the beginning of that article. Usually when Trump says something, I can't remember, but this time is different. Like this time, like he is going after the universities, and I'm going to help him succeed. I'm absolutely going to help him destroy the whole thing, take him down.
But what are you going to be left with?
We're going to build new things.
Yes,
But let's say you're left with nothing. Okay, let's just run with this. Let's say that the argument is you're going to be left with nothing. My argument to you is Dan Dennett used to have a wonderful phrase that he took from borrowed from a philosopher and popularized. If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well.
Mm.
So you're brainwashing entire generations of people into dangerous, toxic, divisive nonsense. Plus, no one could possibly say the universities weren't warned. They've been warned for decades. So fuck them. They've been warned. It's the iron law of woke projection again. The very same people screaming up and down against systemic racism are systemically discriminating against Asians. I mean, it's disgraceful behavior. So what we should do is we should retroactively find all the Asians they discriminated against who would have gotten into their schools, literally take their whole endowment, divvy it up, and give it to them.
Yeah, well, we don't have that problem here, as we discussed earlier. But
yeah.
What worries me, and I've watched videos of Neil Ferguson and Barry Weiss and others
Neil's
talking
awesome.
about Austin.
Barry's great. Yeah, I'm affiliated with them.
Yeah. But do you have laboratories? Do you have marine laboratories? Do you have
It's been 1
research
year.
vessels? Well, I know.
Yeah.
So
So
the thing is, you can teach history and you
Yeah.
can teach philosophy, and those sorts of subjects in a classroom. But you can't do the things I do. And this is what worries me about saying, let's get rid of universities, because we won't get them back.
I'll actually push back on that with the AI revolution coming around the corner and Musk Grok 3. I think, like, if I want to learn something now, I just, go to ChatGPT and I'll say something like, keep asking me questions until you're satisfied that I know this at a master's degree level.
Yeah. I had an interesting experience with ChatGPT 2 days ago.
Yeah.
I was asking it questions about fatty acids, and I asked it sort of gave me what looked like a pretty sensible statement, and I said, could you point me in the direction of references that I could cite to support that?
And it made them up.
It made them up.
Oh,
and it did this several times.
It should be a university administrator. It should be like a president of the university, like Claudine Gay. That's great.
So I couldn't understand how it, or why it would do that.
Yeah, it will. Listen, these problems will be within 2 years. These problems will be completely fixed. So so you have to start somewhere when you build new things. I can't speak to the situation in New Zealand, but in the United States, the universities are by and large anti-capitalism, anti-free speech, anti-American. They're putting out dangerous, toxic, divisive nonsense. They go on witch hunts against their ideological enemies. There are institutional mechanisms like bias response teams. They have weaponized Title IX. I mean, it's the same stuff over and over again. So fuck them. I'm going to help destroy them. I am going to help. I'm going to bring down all of them.
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad here.
Oh, well, good. Then one of the things so this would be really good for you then, and I'm totally sincere when I say this. So then all of the people, first of all, as Elizabeth said the other day, I don't think all people should go to universities. I think vocational schools, I've argued this from day one, those are noble. You make a lot of money. Those are great. We need people they're incredibly valuable professions. I told my daughter to be an electrician. But you may see American students coming over here once we start destroying the universities. Plus, Trump wants to make a new university with the best available tools and evidence. By the way, it's a great picture.
Like Trump University?
No, an actual federal university that's well, we should talk about accreditation too, but there's a great picture of Travis when we were in Wellington standing on the beach holding a sign that said, "Should New Zealand be the 51st American state?" And I thought the reaction was really interesting. We had some great conversations about that, but I personally, I don't want to go into this rabbit hole, but I would love to see New Zealand as the 51st American state, although I think it would never pass by referendum. But the good thing for New Zealand is once we are successful in destroying the institutions that have been spreading toxic, divisive nonsense throughout our country, you could see a surge in enrollment in your institutions because these kids are going to need someplace to go.
Well, I think I'm hoping that this government legislation for academic freedom and institutional neutrality will lead to a situation that public perception improves.
I hope so too.
Because that's the real problem, and that's what a lot of my colleagues just simply don't think about. They don't.
100%.
They operate within an echo chamber,
100%.
and they don't really understand that once you step outside the campus, people think very differently.
In one word, legitimacy. They have thrown away their own legitimacy, and I'm going to make sure that they pay for it.
Right. Okay. Just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have access to some pretty remarkable new tools in a short period of time. I think you're going to see this foster systems of innovation and creativity. I think you're going to see the emergence of, I've already seen, people are talking to me about being on the boards of other universities, even K through 12 school systems that are going online. So I think it's going to create an incredible innovation once we manage to collapse these systems, these corrupt systems.
But would you choose that over going back to universities the way, say, they used to be when they weren't ideologically captured?
Of course not. No.
Yeah.
30 years ago, I would absolutely. Those are the universities we should have again. But we had it at one time. And were there academic fights? Sure, there were academic fights. I was an undergraduate at the time, so I wasn't really privy to those. But, there were more benign splits. And nobody, when you mentioned Jerry Coyne, Richard Dawkins, when they gave a talk or talked about evolution, I published a piece about this. Nobody was calling them a racist or a rapist. Nobody was interrupting their talk with bullhorns. And the people who were interrupting their talk with bullhorns, they would never have, the administration when I was in college would never possibly have let them get away with it. They would have been sanctioned. They would have been disciplined. They possibly would have been off for a term. If they did it repeatedly, they'd be thrown off from the university. But we've had a university system in the United States that's condoned this behavior.
Not at all universities. There are some universities that, Colorado, I think, is one.
We were in Colorado universities, and these places are fetid cesspools of corruption.
Really? I heard somebody associated with one of the universities in Colorado who said that they won't tolerate students.
When?
Quite recently. It was this year.
Okay, well, that's why. Go back 2 or 3 years.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, look.
There's no saving a place like Evergreen, for example.
No, and it gets what it's due. But I think it's really important that we make it clear that there's no saving the Ivies. There'll be nowhere that they can run or hide. Again, I don't know how many times I can say this.
I have a friend at an Ivy League university.
They hide plagiarists. They protect plagiarists.
Well,
so they're doing themselves. They've delegitimized themselves. I don't even have to do anything. We just have to make it so that going to those institutions, like part of it, I think, is making sure you don't hire graduates from Ivy League institutions. I think that, and don't donate to your alma mater. I think that there are ways to fight back against people who are trying to intentionally divide people on the basis of race, intentionally lie to people, fabricating information. Of course, I've fabricated a ton of data myself, but that's another story.
But that was
in another context.
That was satire.
Yeah, and the purpose of my fabricating data, if the data, the whole purpose of when you fabricate data is you don't want people to find it. In order for my project to succeed, they had to find it.
Yeah.
So I had to make it. But I've just absolutely had it, and I'm extremely hopeful with Linda McMahon in the Department of Education as the secretary, and whoever the undersecretary and deputy secretary are. I'm really truly hoping that they can drive the nails in the coffin of this madness. Yeah. DEI bureaucracies, Title IX, bring back Betsy DeVos's rules for Title IX. I'm just really hopeful that they can make the kinds of changes where people will start to trust the institutions. Oh, and one more thing you mentioned about the guy who's an activist for climate change. You want people to look at the data. I'm not an expert in climate change. I couldn't even pass a basic chemistry class at this point. But the way that you do that is that you make sure that there's ideological diversity in your institution, so that someone of no matter what political leaning will look at the affiliations of the people in that department and say, oh, wow, there's a couple Christians, Buddhist, conservative, Marxist, all these people converge on an idea of what the evidence is. Okay, well then it's probably legit, right? But right now we don't have that. We have overwhelming number of people who are on the left, and they're making very specific claims about the world that nobody trusts because they've delegitimized them through other means.
But I think a lot of this, and I've read Eric Kaufman's latest book.
Oh, Eric's great. Eric, he's been a fan of the show. He's a friend of mine.
It's not social justice or critical social justice ideology, which is the term that Helen Pluckrose and I think you guys use, which I think is a good term.
Yeah.
That's not orthogonal to politics necessarily, because as Eric Kaufman says, a lot of people can be sympathetic to it just because they want to be kind, and they think that's somehow being kind.
Yeah.
So there's not necessarily a political valence to it. And there are plenty of people who I interact with who've been very supportive of academic freedom, who consider themselves left-wing.
Have they come out and say so publicly, like 4 years ago when people were getting, right? Did they come out when you did the listener letter? Did they publicly make statements?
Mike Corbelis considered himself left-wing.
Okay. Did they come out during the listener letter debacle and when people were going after you hardcore and say, I'm on the left, I stand up for what this guy believes? Or do they do that now that it's easy? Now that it's easy? Or did they do that when it's hard?
Yeah, well...
Okay, well, there's your answer.
Okay.
So they're not to be trusted. They're cowards.
Yeah.
It's easy to do it now.
Yeah, I just think that there are good people in universities as well as bad people.
Good, and they can find other jobs.
Well, but I still think that universities, the original state admission in a Jonathan Haidt sense.
Totally agree. But so you're in that sense that your university is different than ours, because ours being in the U.S. Because we have a system of tenure that keeps people in jobs for life, right? And we have a bulk of many departments that people have tenure and then adjuncts, and so
you can't get rid of people.
Yeah, you can't get. How are you going to get rid of them?
Yeah.
So what are you going to do?
Yeah,
what are you going to do? You can't get rid of them. You got to burn the thing down. I don't know any other solution. They're not going to change.
Yeah.
We've asked them, we've cajoled them. And so now we got to speak their language. Now it's just power. Now we just come for all of them. We're coming for you.
Yeah. Well,
I wish it were otherwise. I really do. I wish David Seymour's, like, from the bottom of my heart. I think that guy is fantastic. I hope the plan succeeds. I tell you that with the utmost sincerity. I hope you can save your universities. I hope you can institutionalize free speech and give protections, whatever the analog of the Constitution here would be, speech protections for faculty. I hope you can, let the means of error correction thrive. And I hope you can have robust conversations and debates. But that's New Zealand. Our time has passed for that in the United States. It's gone. It's over. It's not happening. But I sincerely hope you succeed.
Okay, well, I'm into that.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for coming on the show.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, man.